Let's do this again one last time. VEVIBLMV'H Law is the spin-off / sequel series to Phineas and Ferb that aired from 2016 to 2019 on Disney XD. For reasons both in and out of its control, it was never able to get the same attention its predecessor got, and so only had 2 seasons. But there's one episode from this show I want to talk about today. An episode that was pulled from airing in most other countries. And when it finally aired in the United States, the episode was barely discussed by the fanbase as a whole, except as a passing mention to the episode paired with it. So, what is the deal with Milo Murphy's Law, Season 2, Episode 5B, Lady Krillers? Let me take you back in time. It was 2018, and I and at least 30 people were avid fans of Milo Murphy's Law. As show co-creator Dan Povenmire once said, we were a small but passionate group. At this time, we were in between seasons 1 and 2, only in the United States. I don't know why this happened, but Disney took over a year and a half to actually start releasing season 2 here. Overseas, however, was a different story. So episodes would be leaked, released early unofficially during this time, along with future episode titles and synopses from TV guides. One of them, translated from German, was Lady Krillers. Milo convinces Tobias Trollhammer to dress up as a woman in the newest Krill Hunter movie. Needless to say, some of us were, skeptical. But I wanted to believe that maybe this would be done in a respectful and tasteful manner. Like, come on, this is from the same people as Phineas and Ferb, and they never punched down on marginalized people, or really punched down as a whole. Haha. Oh, how blissfully unaware and naive I was for this one. It would take a little while for this episode to air. It was skipped in a few countries, presumably for the dressing up as a woman plotline, leaving only its sister episode and the credit sequence containing a few images from it. But eventually, around November 2018, Lady Krillers aired in full in India, and it made its way online not too long after. I will say for the record, I did record and watch both episodes when they officially came out in the United States. Anyway, Lady Krillers was finally upon us, albeit unofficially. Hi, Editing Ace here. I just now realized I never explained the general plot of Milo Murphy's Law, so I'm gonna do that real quick. The show follows the 13-year-old Milo Murphy, the descendant of the originator of Murphy's Law, where anything that can go wrong will go wrong. In spite of this, he is a very upbeat and optimistic kid who always knows what to do when something goes, well, wrong, and the show's tone generally reflects this. He has 2 best friends, Melissa Chase and Zach Underwood, who are along for the ride. There's also Vinny Dakota and Balthazar Cavendish, 2 time travelers sent from the future to protect pistachios from going extinct, but they're very bad at this, and Milo certainly isn't helping. There's some other stuff that happens, but that is more or less the main gist. Anyway, back to the video. At this time, I was not terribly impressed with Season 2 so far, and I had a lot of trepidation about this one. Season 2 had introduced Dr. Doofenshmirtz as a major character, living with Milo and his family while his apartment building was being rebuilt after the events of the Phineas and Ferb effect, the season opener. His inclusion was kind of divisive in the fanbase. Some people didn't mind it, others like myself did mind it quite a bit. I won't get into it too much here, but I was not a fan of how Doof and his story had taken over what was supposed to be Milo's show, not Phineas and Ferb, among other things. Also, episodes were just kinda mid. There was an episode where Milo and his friends set up 2 side characters on a date together because both of them dated inanimate objects. One episode was just the pilot again, but in wintertime. The show kept trying to make certain gags happen. Like, for instance, my mortal nemesis, the recurring raccoon.
The raccoon is back! You're gonna see him soon. He's recurring raccoon.
Besides the Dakota and Cavendish plotline, it was just kind of a lackluster start after a really promising first season and great crossover special. And so the stage is set. The preceding episode, K-Explosion, was about Milo and his classmate / crush Amanda competing on her favorite extreme baking show for the school. It was fine, cute even. Not much to write home about, but I enjoy seeing Milo bond with his other friends. After that, a commercial break, And it begins. It starts off with a pitch trailer for the newest entry of the Krill Hunter franchise, an all-women reboot called Lady Krillers. The director asks what the executive thinks, and he says it's genius.
Recast all the men as women? You got yourself a green light.
Cut to Milo and his friends Melissa and Zach at their school talking about how they're excited for the movie casting in town. They find Tobias Trollhammer, the original Krill Hunter actor, in despair as he wasn't asked to be in this movie. He explains to the kids that he needs to be in it or he will lose his house. He barely has any money left because he uses it to buy Krill-themed art. Milo faints a bunch because it is inconceivable to him that they would make a Krill Hunter movie with no Tobias Trollhammer. Melissa says,
"Too bad you're not a woman."
which gives Milo an idea. The gang dresses Tobias up into Tobina, which is done through song.
You're as pretty as sunflower.
During all this, Dakota and Cavendish encounter an alien while picking up garbage and attempt to catch it. They try and fail, with a seemingly random Bison getting in their way. Back in the A-plot, introduced to the casting crew as Milo's aunt, Tobina is put through a series of increasingly ridiculous auditions for the lead role in the movie, until through wacky shenanigans involving the B-plot, it is revealed to everyone that Tobina is actually Tobias in disguise. The director tells him to leave, but Tobias attempts to give an inspiring speech about how he is the face of the Krill Hunter franchise. Everyone claps, and the director decides to give him the role of the villain. Milo asks the director how this will affect continuity, and he's just like,
"Who cares about the script? We don't even read those anymore. We do what we want with no regard to plot or character or making sense to the people watching it. Confusing stuff, cabbage tree vacuum cleaner."
Milo's unsure of what lesson he learned, and Tobias gets trampled by a lone bison. Then, right before the credits, a new character named Billy Bison apologizes for hijacking the episode as he has Bison's Law, where anything that can bison will bison. Then he gets trampled by a herd of bison. So that was an episode of Mile Murphy's Law. A very confusing and baffling one. It was also rather transmisogynist. Really, really transmisogynist. A quick 101 on transmisogyny. Transmisogyny is the specific intersection of transphobia and misogyny, where trans women and trans feminine people are discriminated against and hated for being, well, you guessed it, transgender and feminine. In general society, women and men are seen as separate beings who couldn't possibly be similar to each other in any way whatsoever. Along with this, femininity is seen as subservient and inferior to masculinity. So when a trans woman comes out to the bigoted and narrow-minded, this is seen as a threat to this rigid and sexist gender hierarchy. And so, transmisogyny is born. The term was coined by trans author Julia Serrano in her book Whipping Girl, where she describes this in more detail. I will be referring to her work quite often, as do a lot of my sources used for this video.
What is this, Shakespeare?
This is not Shakespeare.
There are two kinds of transmisogynist tropes seen in media. The first is the deceiver trope, where trans women are seen as evil predators tricking men into believing them to be cis women and gaining something from it. The trans woman is eventually revealed to be a man, and reactions of shock and disgust ensue, as seen in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, Family Guy, and a whole slew of other media. The second is the pathetic trope, which is similar to the deceiver trope, but instead of being seen as evil tricksters, the trans feminine are seen as, well, a joke. Point and laugh at how ridiculous it is for someone deemed to be a man to be a woman. These two tropes can be demonstrated at the same time, like in, say, Tootsie. Tootsie is a romantic comedy from 1982 about a desperate actor who cross-dresses as a woman to get a role in a soap opera. Lady Krillers has a similar premise to the movie, and the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot has the same concept of rebooting a well-known franchise with an all-female cast. So in an attempt to understand Lady Krillers, I watched both of these movies. Tootsie is a very, very flawed movie. I mean, the whole thing is based around the idea of a man dressing up as a woman and deceiving people through personal gain, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The main character, Michael Dorsey, takes up the mantle of Dorothy Michaels, an older firecracker of a woman who takes no shit from anyone, and her character in the soap opera quickly becomes popular due to this, even a feminist icon. At first, Tootsie seemed to be making a point about how hard women have it in society, especially in the entertainment industry, like the misogyny Dorothy and her female co-stars face. Then, somewhere down the line, the script realized it wasn't doing enough homophobia and transmisogyny for comedy, so it doubled down on those jokes by the end. I don't really know how to feel about Tootsie, but I think it was trying to say something. I guess it could be summed up by what the main character says to the love interest by the end of the movie.
But I was a better man with you as a woman than I ever was with a woman as a man. You know what I mean? I just gotta learn to do it without the dress.
Whether or not it was trying to say something good, I don't know. What I do know is that Lady Krillers doesn't really think about what the movie was attempting to say, and just takes the male actor pretends to be a woman to get a role and is seen as a very unconventional woman bit, and goes from there. At the end of the Tobina song, she's seen on the cover of a leading ladies magazine, which is very similar to the montage in Tootsie of Dorothy taking photos for several magazines. That is about the only other major reference to the movie I can find. Ghostbusters 2016, on the other hand, it was okay. I quickly realized I did not need to watch this movie to understand Lady Krillers, but oh well, I watched it anyway. I don't think it deserved the scorn and hatred it got back in the day for being a movie with women in it, though. Come on, people, find better things to be mad at. Speaking of which, back to Lady Krillers. I would say that this episode plays into both the deceiver and pathetic archetypes. Tobias Trollhammer is a friend of Milo and desperately needs the income, which makes him sympathetic to the audience. However, when he is seen as Tobina, there are a lot of jokes at her expense. Like Tobina taking down a robber, which we're supposed to see as somehow being funny or suspicious of her identity, or having to shave, for instance. Because it's so unusual for a woman to have to shave. Oh boy. Honestly, the entire Tobina song sequence is just a huge jab at trans women and trans feminine people in general. I mean, listen to these goddamn lyrics. Tobina, you got it going on, though it takes a makeup marathon to make you vaguely pretty. You're as pretty as some flower and you might have to shave in an hour. We believe that you'll achieve your every dream. I don't want to be too graphic, but you've got a face that could stop traffic? Do you see how patronizing and audacious this is? Was there no one on the team that saw this and went, hey, maybe that's not okay? Let alone any trans people involved in the show itself? It doesn't matter that Tobias is just playing as Tobina to get a role and isn't actually trans. Being cis and straight doesn't stop people from making jokes at the expense of trans women and gay people, like seen in Tootsie. It certainly didn't stop the episode from doing these jokes.
As my dad always says, you can put lipstick on a pig. But you can.
And you might have to shave in an hour.
We'd look like idiots if we cast a man to play a woman.
It is not because I'm a man or because I'm wearing a dress. It is because I am a man wearing a dress. I may have lost my train of thought.
That's all supposed to be funny. At Tobias's expense. At trans women's expenses. And yet, in 2018, when this episode was first seen by the fan base, no one really acknowledged it. Everyone was way more interested in posting screenshots of Milo and Amanda together from Ksrmvzh. If Lady Krillers was mentioned at all, it was just sort of a shrug. Hell, the marketing for both of these episodes barely ever showed Lady Krillers, and if it did, it was the altogether 3-minute B-plot of Dakota and Cavendish. It's like they knew it was going to be bad. I did talk about this episode with other people at the time on private Discord servers, and I even made at least one post about it on my Tumblr, but it really stunk that I never saw anyone else online talk about how transmisogynist it was. The only place I could find any specific Lady Krillers discussion was in the YouTube comments of the songs in the episode. And they all varied from being freaked out by the concept, calling it part of a woke agenda, to even praise about how progressive this was, actually. And when the episode was officially released in the United States in February 2019, it was the same thing all over again. Only this time, the episode had really low ratings. I remember seeing people asking why this was. Yeah, I wonder, I thought. Of course, in hindsight, it was more than likely the fact Milo Murphy's Law exclusively aired on Disney XD, a channel you had to pay more to watch, and the show barely had any advertising to the point that to this day, people are surprised when I tell them there was a Phineas and Ferb spinoff. But at the time, I was just upset and really disappointed in both the fanbase and the people on the show. The people on the show did the transphobic episode, and I was really let down by the overall fanbase's lack of response towards it. Why? I've been asking myself the same question since I first watched this episode back in 2018. Why? Why did they write this? Who was this for? Lady Krillers isn't only transmisogynist, but when I saw it for the first time, the tone felt off. Compared to other episodes in Milo Murphy's Law, this one felt meaner than the show usually gets. At this point, the show saved most of its jabs for Dr. Doofenshmirtz. To me, at least, it seemed like the writer was mad about that Ghostbusters movie and wrote a whole episode about it. And if it was supposed to be a Tootsie homage, no kid living today knows what that movie is. Well, except maybe for online theater kids, I guess. It's simply just a vehicle for man in a dress jokes. It's saying that movie executives don't make any sense. Those are really the only two things I got out of this. Then, there's Billy Bison. His entire existence has been baffling me for years. Him being some kind of Milo parody, but he summons Bison instead of General Chaos, wasn't even that funny. The whole PSA apology bit wasn't even funny. It just made me grit my teeth in dread because this episode just had one more joke to pull. Did they think random spontaneous buffalo were funny? I didn't get it. And then it hit me. What was the name of the guy in Silence of the Lambs? Buffalo Bill. Billy Bison is just a kid-friendly reference to that Buffalo Bill, the one that murders women and uses their skin to make a woman suit. Sure, you can argue semantics, like Bison and Buffalo not being the same thing, or being a joke on the historical Buffalo Bill, but after watching a whole episode of man in a dress jokes that was apparently based on the movie, based on the idea of a man deceptively cross-dressing as a woman for personal gain, what else is there to say? That's the joke. That's the only other explanation for this random Buffalo Bison inclusion. It could have been any large animal, but they specifically chose bison, which is technically another name for buffalo. And with this revelation, I felt worse than before. Why did they do this? I don't know, but it felt very intentional and hurtful.
I've grown out of my awkward phase.
Yeah,
What
I
in
love
the
big nose.
world
Nothing
happened
funnier
there?
than a big nose.
There is nothing funnier than a big nose, except
No,
maybe
it's
a
true.
man in woman's clothing.
Oh, that's brilliant. Men in
Why did-
women's clothing is hysterical.
Oh, yes.
Remember how I said earlier that Phineas and Ferb would never do these types of punching down at marginalized people jokes? Well, about that. While they didn't dedicate a whole episode to it, Phineas and Ferb were not immune to doing it every now and again. Like in Unfair Science Fair Redux, Doofenshmirtz mistakes a woman's voice for being a man's and gets punched in the face. Or in The Monster of Phineas and Ferbenstein, Doofenshmirtz's concoction Bruinator turns him into a fairy princess instead of a scary monster. Or Doof having to wear girls' clothing in his childhood, as seen in Gaming the System. The Major Monogram and Doofenshmirtz bit I just played, that was from an in-character commentary track for the episode Attack of the 50-Foot Sister, available on the Across the Second Dimension DVD. Shoutouts to Jade Quinto for uploading it onto YouTube years ago. Sure, it's in Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Major Monogram's voices, but it seems very clear to me that both then, and maybe even now, Dan and Swampy found the whole concept to be absolutely hysterical. I mean, what else do they find to be funny? Surely not. Oh no. Dan, no!
I cannot even tell you how many people have asked me to do this, because apparently this guy from the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial reminds a lot of people of this guy. So here you go.
I'm an expert witness. I'm saying, as an expert witness.
Let's start with the easy question then.
That was pretty easy. Go ahead.
Doctor, you're going to have to just answer the questions.
Okay, sorry about that. Having trouble getting into this side.
You need to just answer the question.
Okay. I'm not sure why we're arguing psychiatry, because I'm telling you what it is.
Dr. Siegel, you just need to answer the question.
Okay.
Mr. Depp fell asleep with ice cream in his hand. That's not vomitous, right?
I was told it was vomitous.
Okay.
It does fit just a little too well, doesn't it?
Also, I don't know where else to fit this in, but as an asexual person, I find Dan Povenmire confirming Perry the Platypus to be asexual on TikTok a bit, conflicting. I think he was just reiterating that Perry the Platypus will never be paired with anyone romantically. Which would be aromantic, but I doubt he knows the difference. Either way, I felt like he just picked asexual as a safe alternative to gay, bisexual, or transgender to both appease queer fans of the show, and so Disney wouldn't get on his ass, which really sucks and has its own problems. Representation in the way of throwing others under the bus isn't good representation. Not to mention, it remains to be seen whether or not Perry will actually be called asexual in the upcoming continuation reboot, and that being represented in a meaningful way. However, I am not trans feminine. What do some other trans people think about this episode, especially as longtime fans of Phineas and Ferb? Well, I'm friends with some trans people, so I asked them about it. Here's what they said.
I remember watching this episode as a little kid and not exactly understanding why it never aired in the States. That's a testament to how close they got to doing something right with this incredibly transphobic stereotype. Like, the first few minutes of the episode have some very casual jokes about Tobina, like, trying on makeup and things, where it doesn't feel like it has any transphobic intent, even though it very clearly is going off of a very old stereotype there of just man in dress. But then slowly, as the episode progresses, you see more and more jokes about Tobina being a man in women's spaces, and that being some disgusting thing, so they're just playing into all of those same things again, and it's the source of most of the jokes in the episode. And then by the end of it, when you have that big reveal, it literally just fully escalates to, this is man in dress, this is man in dress. And it's a shame too, because this episode could have been a great commentary on reboots if it weren't for the fact that so much of the focal point of the episode was the fact that Tobina was a man in a dress. And that's just, it's frustrating. At least the Cavendish and Dakota segment was good though, that's something.
As a fan of Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law, it felt like a shockingly out-of-tone setup, with the whole episode seemingly being a dig at Ghostbusters 2016 and women-led reboots in general. The Gsvb'iv shows have always had a real pro-girl power streak, and while that wasn't necessarily anything groundbreaking, its absence is really noticeable, especially when the silence is filled with this weirdly gamergatey dialogue. More broadly speaking, it's just a real nothing of an episode. Even Cavendish and Dakota only really have like 2 funny lines the entire time, Murphy's Law is not relevant at all, and Weird Al doesn't get to do anything really interesting from a performance perspective. As a trans person specifically, I really only take major issue with the first song of the episode. Cartoon characters dress as women all the time, and in this episode the jokes about it, outside of that one song, are really nothing more than what the average Bugs Bunny cartoon would do. The first song, however, is so jarringly, viscerally upsetting that it's almost surreal to hear it sung by Danny Jacob with the lyrical sensibilities that I'm usually used to hearing in all the legit bangers from the Phineas and Ferb Milo Murphy's Law song library. With lines specifically pointing out Tobina's need to shave more frequently and her broad shoulders, it is hitting on so much specific transmisogynist mockery. Even worse, it goes on to essentially say that trans women not only are basically men, but are also just straight up ugly. And at the end of the day, literally none of it mattered or was entertaining at all. Confusing stuff, cabbage tree, vacuum cleaner.
You know what's hysterical? When women are ugly. Okay, seriously, I'm pretty desensitized to man in a dress jokes in cartoons. Sometimes they work in a transgressive way, like the drag icon that is Bugs Bunny, and sometimes it's just obviously punching down, like a certain Family Guy character that some sucker probably made a whole video about. The thing is, while it's super on brand for an edgy, unpolitically correct comedy to make a joke where the punchline is essentially that woman looks like a man and that's ugly, it's always been so weird to me that a Phineas and Ferb spinoff went in that direction. It's generally such a positive franchise, with Phineas and Milo's upbeat personalities driving their respective series, and Candace and Doofenshmirtz's persistent failures being entirely self-inflicted. The only time that I remember the show going after characters' appearances at all is when Doofenshmirtz used the Uglyator, and most of the targets of that were transformed in cartoonish ways that didn't resemble any real humans. It's funny when Doof gets hit with the Uglyator and looks the same, because nobody looks like Doofenshmirtz. It's not really punching down. Lady Krillers does feel like it's punching down, and it's really weird and out of place because of that. It's almost as if their writers don't even view this as punching down at all, that it'd be widely understood that what Tobias is doing is weird and thus wouldn't bring in any controversy. It's honestly revealing of some cis male creators' ignorance, as if they're so set in their ways that they didn't even register that, even if you removed any context about trans stereotypes or history, the punchline would still be that women who have masculine features or vice versa are ugly, and like, Really? What point is being made with that? What does this even have to do with the premise of cynical reboots being bad? It obviously annoys me as a trans woman who doesn't like stereotypes being perpetrated, but it also annoys me as someone who likes comedy to be clever and funny. Lady Krillers is neither. It is tired and hacky. Don't get me wrong, I still love Phineas and Ferb and quite enjoyed Milo Murphy's Law, but this episode just bums me out. I really hope the PNF revival doesn't do more shit like this. Give us the DeCavendish wedding instead, cowards.
So, what do we do with all this information? Cancel Dan and Swampy for their crimes against the trans community? Honestly, I just want an apology. Back in March 2021, Dan made a TikTok about Rg'h. He explains that fans of both the show and the character pointed out to him that he has some problematic stereotypical character traits, which Dan thinks are valid criticisms. He explains that he made Rg'h to represent kids from cultures who don't have the same concept of summer vacation as North Americans do, and that they leaned onto the cultural differences for jokes, but says they might not have aged well. Then he says he found out from a South Asian creator on the platform that people are using Rg'h to attack him and other South Asians, using Rg'h as an insult, and Dan denounces this. Similar to that situation, I just want some acknowledgement of the transphobia in both Phineas and Ferb and especially Milo Murphy's Law, and that they'll be more mindful next time. It would also be nice for trans people to be in their shows too, behind the scenes and on screen. Transgender and non-binary representation in media is not great. It's been slowly getting better over the years, sure I guess, but the amount of good representation that I've personally encountered I can count on maybe barely two hands. It was worse in the 20th century and the early 2000s, of course, with people barfing at seeing a trans woman or pretending to be one to gain something, so at least it's a little better now. It's just so strange to see this type of joke as a whole episode nowadays, even back in 2018. I remember this movie called Missing Link came out the same year, and the main character is ridiculed for going by the name Susan, at least at first. It's just ridiculous to keep this kind of trend going in this day and age. And on-screen representation isn't the end-all, be-all either. I want there to be more transgender and non-binary people working on shows and stuff as writers, storyboard artists, directors, and producers, so that when something like Lady Krillers is written, someone is safe enough to point out that these types of jokes aren't okay and can contribute to more harm towards these vulnerable groups of people. And there's a lot of harmful things towards transgender and non-binary people right now. Currently in the United States and the United Kingdom, trans people are the scapegoat of a reactionary movement to roll back civil rights for women and LGBTQ+ people, and basically anyone not a cis white able-bodied man. There have been hundreds of bills in the United States alone targeting trans people for simply being in the public eye or trying to medically transition. If you think these laws will only affect trans and non-binary people, no they won't. Cis people have already been caught up in the frenzy of these laws if they're mistaken to be transgender in any way. Besides, what matters the most is that trans people, children even, have died because of this bigotry. Like Layla Alcorn, Nex Benedict, and Brianna Gray. All transgender teenagers who died as a result of the violent bigotry they were receiving from those around them. One of the other lyrics in that Tobina song was, "Though you're a star, we'll keep you far from the freeway just for safety." I know in context it's because of Murphy's Law, but do you know how many trans and non-binary people have died violently because of their being who they are? And that's the end result of transmisogyny. Of all types of transphobia and bigotry. I know it sounds extreme, but it absolutely isn't. Do you know how scary it is to be a trans person right now? To be part of a marginalized group of people with rights and lives being threatened or taken away? It's terrifying. For nearly 6 years, I've been wanting to talk about all this in a video essay format, but it took until now to do so. That's for a couple of reasons. For one, I've never made a YouTube video before, at least nothing quite like this. Another reason was that it was really hard to get my thoughts together to write this all up. And finally, I am transgender, specifically agender. I guess that's obvious by now, but this all affected me as someone who is trans and wants to be part of the animation industry someday. To see transphobia from the very people who made Phineas and Ferb, a show that would lead me to becoming the person I am today, it hurt a lot and felt personal. Not to mention that coming out and saying something was transphobic means you're going to get a lot of hate for it, especially if you're trans. I was scared of that, and quite frankly I still am, but as both a fan of these two shows and others, and as someone who is trans, I think it's important to me to talk about it. So, to anyone watching this, please, examine and ask yourself how and why you feel the way that you do about transgender folks and other marginalized people, and try to do better. And if you're a showrunner or want to be one someday, hire those people, and make an environment that is safe for them to speak out if you do wrong. And listen to them, because their voices matter, even without a system of bigoted and ignorant people that want to do away with folks like us. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a good day or evening. Aston out. Peace!